The original duology of NES Zelda titles was a smash success for Nintendo. The original game remains an iconic part of gaming today, a symbol for both the series and gaming in the 80s as a whole. While The Adventure of Link may not be as celebrated as its older brother, it was still a commercial success, and has served to influence the series in its own ways unique from its darling counterpart. When the inevitable time to make a sequel came, it was a shock to no one when the original directors, Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, would return to produce and direct it respectively. Hot off the success of Super Mario Bros. 3, the duo were proving that their success on the NES was not a flash in the pan or even a string of luck, but an understanding of video games and their designs at such a fundamental level that the two could almost do no wrong. When these two worked together, you knew that you were in for a treat. It's no secret how much of a triumph A Link to the Past is, both for Nintendo and the greater gaming sphere as a whole. If the NES duology was the blueprint, then A Link to the Past serves as a foundation so unbelievably solid that games today, both Zelda and those inspired by it, are still building upon its lessons and designs. And while it's hard to find a video game that's been considered to have aged perfectly, I think that this SNES classic has one of the greatest arguments for it, and I'd like to use this video to explore why. Without further ado, this is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Originally starting development for the NES, the game was moved to its 16-bit successor, the SNES, in order to take advantage of its better hardware. The success of the first two games was a massive boon for the team, as Nintendo saw fit to push the budget of the game further than typical for their teams. This was most evident in the size of the cartridge they worked on. Most SNES games at the time were released on cartridges with 512 kilobytes, but the Zelda team was given double that, a full megabyte of space to work with. This granted the team incredible freedom to craft a world larger than ever before, and they made sure to take advantage of it. When the SNES hit Japanese markets in November of 1990, it was walking into a significantly different market than the one the NES was dealing with. The video game market had matured, for lack of a better word, and the demand for innovative experiences had skyrocketed. Players wanted to see higher-end graphics, listen to better quality music, and feel smoother gameplay than was ever possible on older hardware. Nintendo was more than happy to oblige with their initial offerings, with F-Zero offering high-octane racing, SimCity and Pilot Wings for more relaxed but in-depth simulation experiences than what could be offered on the NES, and finally, Super Mario World, the flagship title for the console that could easily be argued as one of the greatest video games ever made. It took the already solid foundation laid out by the series and refined it to a sharp point, so focused in its intent and design that there's no mistaking it for anything else than a fully realized experience. By contrast, the Zelda series was in a bit of an unsure place in regards to its identity. Zelda 1 was almost as open-ended as a game could be in the 1980s, where players could choose to forgo central mechanics of the gameplay if they wanted to make their experience unique. Compare this to Zelda 2, which was comparatively more restrictive in how progression worked, sometimes to its own detriment. While Mario 3 to Mario World was a simple evolution that had started taking shape from the first game, A Link to the Past was a full-on transformation of the series, taking the best parts of both of its predecessors to craft an experience unlike anything the action-adventure genre had ever seen before. For the first time in the series, the subtitle of the game plays a significant part in the game's narrative, both on a surface and thematic level. And it could be argued that this was a happy coincidence, as the Japanese title, Triforce of the Gods, was changed due to Nintendo of America's guidelines surrounding religious imagery at the time. A Link to the Past, by contrast, serves as an incredible subtitle that shows exactly what the writing team was aiming for with this game's story. According to the Hylian scrolls, the mythical gods descended from the heavens to the world and created order and life. The god of power dyed the mountains red with fire and created land. The god of wisdom created science and wizardry and brought order to nature. And the god of courage, through justice and vigor, created life. The animals that crawl the land and the birds that soar in the sky. After the gods had finished their work, they left the world, but not before creating a symbol of their strength, a golden triangle known as the Triforce. A small but powerful portion of the essence of the gods was held in this mighty artifact, which was to guide the intelligent life on the world of Hyrule. Although it was an inanimate object, the Triforce had the power to bestow 3 titles which gave the person who received them great powers: the Forger of Strength, the Keeper of Knowledge, and the Juror of Courage. From its hiding place in the so-called Golden Land, where the gods placed it, the Triforce beckoned people from the outside world to seek it in the hope that someone worthy of these titles would find it. With their magic-infused blood, the Hylian people were endowed with psychic powers and skill in wizardry. It was also said that their long, pointed ears enabled them to hear special messages from the gods, so they were held in high esteem by many people in Hyrule. Their descendants settled in various parts of the world and passed on their knowledge and magical lore to all people. But in its passing, the lore was often distorted or lost altogether. In Hyrule, there are many Hylian buildings which are mentioned repeatedly in the legends. These buildings, which now lie in ruin, pale shadows of their former splendor, are closely tied to the Triforce. Some were even said to house the Triforce. If it were only a symbol of the gods, the Triforce would be coveted by many. But a verse from the Book of Medora made the Triforce even more desirable. In a realm beyond sight, the sky shines gold, not blue. There, the Triforce's might makes mortal dreams come true. Many aggressively searched for the wish-granting Triforce, but no one, not even the Hylian sages, was sure of its location. The knowledge had been lost over time. Some said the Triforce lay under the desert. Others said it was in the cemetery in the shadow of Death Mountain, but no one ever found it. That yearning for the Triforce soon turned to lust for power, which in turn led to the spilling of blood. Soon, the only motive left among those searching for the Triforce was pure greed. One day, a gate to the Golden Land of the Triforce was opened by a gang of thieves skilled in the black arts. This land was like no other. In the gathering twilight, the Triforce shone from its resting place high above the world. In a long-running battle, the leader of the thieves fought his way past his followers in a lust for the golden power. After vanquishing his own followers, the leader stood triumphant over the Triforce and grasped it with his blood-stained hands. He heard a whispered voice. "If thou hast a strong desire or dream, wish for it." And in reply, the roaring laughter of the brigand leader echoed across time and space, and even reached the far-off land of Hyrule. The name of this king of thieves is Ganondorf, but he is known by his alias, Ganon. No one knows what Ganon wished for from the Triforce. However, in time, evil power begins to flow from the Golden Land, and greedy men were drawn there to become members of Ganon's army. Black clouds permanently darkened the sky, and many disasters beset Hyrule. The Lord of Hyrule sent for the 7 wise men and the Knights of Hyrule and ordered them to seal the entrance to the Golden Land. The Triforce, being an inanimate object, cannot judge between good and evil. Therefore, it could not know that Ganon's wishes were evil. It merely granted them. In order to combat this evil, the people of Hyrule referred to their ancient texts once again and discovered tales of a blade called the Master Sword, the blade of evil's bane. Capable of defeating any evil it came across, it was deemed the best chance against this impossible threat. As the 7 wise men searched for a valiant person to take up the Master Sword, Ganon's evil army swarmed from the tainted Golden Land into Hyrule and attacked the castle. The wise men and the Knights of Hyrule combined forces to wage war on this evil horde. The knights took the full brunt of the fierce attack, and although they fought courageously, many a brave soul was lost that day. However, their lives were not lost in vain, for they bought precious time for the 7 wise men to magically seal Ganon in the Golden Land. All of Hyrule rejoiced at the victory that upheld peace and order over Ganon's evil and chaos. This war, which had claimed many lives, became known as the Imprisoning War in stories told in later centuries. Many centuries have passed since the Imprisoning War. The land of Hyrule healed its wounds, and the people lived in peace for a long time. Memories of the vicious Imprisoning War faded over the generations. It is no surprise, then, that no one was prepared for the new disasters that have recently struck Hyrule. Pestilence and drought, uncontrollable even by magic, ravaged the land. The King of Hyrule, after counsel with the sages, ordered an investigation into the imprisoned Dark World, as the Golden Land had come to be known. But the wise men's seal was apparently intact. He offered rewards for anyone who could find the source of these troubles. In answer to these summons, a stranger named Aghanim came and quelled the disasters with a previously unseen form of magic. As a reward, the king gave him a new position as chief advisor and heir to the 7 wise men. The masses proclaimed him their hero. Peace had returned to Hyrule. Or had it? Of late, rumors have traveled their whispering path with alarming frequency. Rumors saying Aghanim now rules the country with his magic. Rumors of strange magical experiments in the castle tower at night. The people of Hyrule were gripped by dread. What an upgrade from the first 2 games, huh? It's an incredible leap in scale and grandeur, featuring the first creation myth in the series, explaining Ganon's origins, the imprisoning war that sealed him away, and properly setting up the events of the game all in one fell swoop. While the game's intro doesn't delve into every detail explained here, the fact that there's an introduction with visuals at all is an upgrade from the static text crawls of the original games. And what striking visuals they are! From the first moment of booting the game up, it's clear that Nintendo wants the player to know that they are about to experience a grand quest. The pieces of the Triforce converge on each other, the title card appearing and the Master Sword cutting through the darkness to reveal the first glimpse of this vast new land of Hyrule. As great as the visuals are, the music is the star standout. Koji Kondo is back and practically kicks the door in with the first swell of trumpets. While the first 2 Zelda titles kept their title screens more understated and let the music ease the players into the adventure, they were perfect for what they needed to be, slowly building to the grand unknown the players would be adventuring through. A Link to the Past opts to take a more direct approach, boldly announcing its intentions with an opening melody that remains iconic to the series to this day. It is without a doubt the best title card the series has seen to this point, and still one of its best over 30 years later. The introductory cutscene that plays after the title card depicts the events of the Imprisoning War and how said events eventually faded into the annals of history. When we first see the Kingdom of Hyrule for ourselves, it's not a land at peace, but one under mutiny. The king has been assassinated and murdered directly on his throne by his most trusted advisor, Aghanim. Using his dark magic, he takes complete control of Hyrule Castle and its military, rounding up descendants of the 7 wise men to break the seal on the Dark World and gain further power. In a last, desperate attempt for help, Zelda reaches out telepathically to anyone who may hear her. Her words reach the ears of 2 men, a sleeping young boy and his uncle. While the boy is startled, his uncle reassures him and tells him that he'll be going out for a bit and to go back to sleep. Of course, the young boy's curiosity is piqued. Was the woman's voice real? Did his uncle hear it too? Is that why he left? In a flash, the boy grabs a lantern and rushes towards the storm in Hyrule Castle. Quickly sneaking inside, the boy finds his uncle wounded up against the wall of the castle's basement. With his final breaths, he bequeaths his sword and shield to Link and tells the boy that his responsibility now falls to him. save the princess, and protect the royal lineage of Hyrule. Without even a moment to mourn, Link is immediately beset by the brainwashed guard of Hyrule Castle, the same men who killed his uncle in cold blood. Forced to battle his way through the castle, the boy eventually finds his way to the captive princess, who tells Link of the rapidly deteriorating situation and that she needs to be evacuated immediately. She directs him towards a secret passage behind her and her deceased father's throne, and the two use it to slink away towards Sanctuary. Upon arrival, a priest loyal to the throne is there to greet the pair and helps them come up with their next course of action. If Link can manage to find the legendary Master Sword, the Blade of Evil's Bane, it will be his best shot of defeating the evil wizard and saving the land. Unfortunately, no one is sure of where the Master Sword is, let alone how to retrieve it. The priest points Link in the direction of a nearby village, where a descendant of the 7 wise men lives. If anyone in Hyrule were to know what to do to retrieve the sword, it would be him. With this in mind, and the well wishes of the princess, Link marches off to save Hyrule from the grip of darkness. This is by far the most effective opening in the series so far, and if you've watched my other videos, you know that I think Zelda 1 and 2 both have solid openings by their own standards as NES action-adventure games. But A Link to the Past is so smart, so efficient with how it communicates its ideas and design to the player that I need to go over it step by step to show it off. First, in Link's house. When you get up, there are pots and a conspicuous chest that your uncle left untouched. This one room teaches players 3 things quickly: how to interact with the overworld, how and why you should open chests, and most importantly, how to shuffle and equip your inventory. That last one is extremely important because unlike the last 2 games in the series, which had every single action tied to 2 face buttons, the SNES controller has a significant amount of new buttons to play with. 2 new face buttons and 2 shoulder buttons. By opening the chest and acquiring the lantern, players are taught how to equip said item and use it on its new dedicated button, the Y button. When you find your uncle and are given the sword, you are then taught how to use your sword, which is done on the B button. And finally, new to the series for the first but certainly not the last time, by pressing X at any point on your quest, you can pull up a map of Hyrule or whatever dungeon you're trekking through. This alone makes A Link to the Past a massive improvement over the first 2 games. While I understand and appreciate the appeal of memorizing and creating maps to remember and communicate secrets to yourself and others, the in-game maps A Link to the Past offers are a perfect compromise. They communicate your position in the world, but avoid marking blatantly hidden secrets. The game will occasionally point you in the direction of plot-important locations or items, but if you want to fully explore and understand Hyrule in this game, you need to be alert and capable of understanding your arsenal at all times. And once again, in a melding of its 2 predecessors, A Link to the Past gives players 2 options upon exiting Sanctuary. If you fancy yourself an explorer, you can head right out of Sanctuary towards the mountains to find the first dungeon in the game. Or, if you follow the words of the priest in Sanctuary, you'll be directed to the home of the Elder. By following the map, Link ends up in Kakariko Village. While the last game had several Hylian towns Link could visit, this game features only one. But my goodness, what a town it is. The relaxing music, the bright inviting colors, and the myriad of things to do and explore are ever-changing throughout the game. This town offers a fantastic place for Link to stock up on items for his journey, some familiar like arrows and bombs, and some brand new. As soon as Link enters town, he can find the first of a now standard collectible for the series, a piece of heart. Collect 4, and Link creates a new heart container and expands his health pool. There's a total of 24 to collect in this game, some easier to find than others, but it makes for fantastic incentive to explore this brand new world of Hyrule. Another new item Link can procure is the Magic Bottle. Capable of storing a multitude of things that can heal Link, they are another first appearance of a soon-to-become standardized part of the Zelda experience. Of course, be sure to visit the bug catcher in town as well, because he'll give you a net to take full advantage of the bottles. Once you've stocked up and familiarized yourself with the town, Link heads to the Elder's house, only to discover that he isn't home. His wife is, but she's unsure where he is and can't help much with the Master Sword either. Asking around town, the Elder's grandson thankfully knows exactly where his grandfather is and points us in the direction of his hideout near the Eastern Palace. Upon fighting the Elder, who introduces himself as Sahasrahla, he tells Link that the key to finding the Master Sword lies in 3 magical pendants hidden across Hyrule. The first, conveniently, being in the Eastern Palace right outside. If we can manage to acquire it, Sahasrahla will not only tell us more of the legend behind the Blade of Evil's Bane, but gift us a magical artifact to help make our journey easier. With this motivation in mind, our journey into the first dungeon begins. The Eastern Palace is an extraordinarily simple dungeon. It does not feature any demanding challenges or puzzles, introducing pressure plates and multiple layers to the screen as a series first, but none of the obstacles will act as anything more than a teaching tool to encourage learning on the player's part. A majority of the challenge in this dungeon is in its combat and taking advantage of the 8-directional movement on the SNES. A variety of new enemies make their debut here, and all of them feature different strategies to effectively take them out. This assortment of enemies and strategies means players will understand quickly that combat and positioning is not something that can be brute forced through, and will require a careful analysis of the area and objects at their disposal. Before I forget, we should go over the basic combat in this game. Combat in A Link to the Past is not nearly as stiff and awkward as Zelda 1, or as difficult as The Adventure of Link. Link's sword fighting has gotten more effective in the jump to 16-bit, with an actual swing motion that has Link move the sword from his right side to his center in a horizontal slash. It's much faster, easier to hit, and most importantly, has good reach comparatively to every other enemy in the game. You never feel like you have to overextend to do damage or stop awkwardly every time you want to swing the sword once. Now, the swing isn't perfect. Despite being able to move in 8 directions now, Link can only swing in the 4 cardinal directions like the first game. This was due to graphical limitations, and it's why Link doesn't have diagonally moving sprites. He simply shifts diagonally when walking. I also find there are some times that hitting it from the side where it looks like it should hit just whiffs. I have to imagine that hitboxes can only be so accurate on the SNES, and at this point I know not to rely on hitting from that angle, but it can still trip new players up. Fortunately, they gave Link a new tool to better take advantage of the new angles he could be attacked from. By holding the attack button, Link will hold his sword out in front of him. Wait a second for this sound, release, and bam! A Zelda staple, the spin attack. This move is more powerful than a normal swing, but as a risk, kills your movement speed while charging it. And if an enemy runs into the sword while you're charging it, the charge is cancelled, and you either do a little poke of damage or none at all. It's a great addition to Link's sword capabilities, and will be included in every single Zelda game afterwards as one of Link's signature moves. It's so ubiquitous to the character, it's been his damn recovery in Smash Bros. Since that series began. Talk about a legacy-defining feature. When analyzing the areas specifically, some of the hidden secrets in the dungeon will require thinking a bit outside the box compared to the first 2 games. For example, if you'd like to take advantage of your 2 new bottles, jump off a ledge into these 2 pots to discover fairies at the bottom. A simple secret, but one previously impossible in the NES duology. The dungeon item is the bow, an item familiar to Zelda 1 players, but unlike that game, the arrows are their own ammo source now. This bow allows for long-range combat at this point in the game, but as time goes on will slowly be pivoted into a more puzzle-focused role. The boss of the dungeon is 6 Armos Knights. While they may look intimidating, with his new bow Link won't have to worry too much about them. They hop around the room in a repeated pattern, only really threatening Link when they line up and bounce towards him. Otherwise, they're more concerned with their weird version of Duck Duck Goose than attacking. But once Link kills 5 of their friends, the final knight glows red with anger and begins directly attacking by attempting to stomp on Link. But the attack plan remains the same. Arrows or sword slashes, and the fight ends with Link victorious. With this victory, Link acquires the first of 3 pendants, the Pendant of Courage. Sahasrahla tells Link that by proving his courage in the Eastern Palace, he has earned Sahasrahla's faith that he will be capable of wielding the Master Sword, as well as a relic handed down from the 7 Wise Men, the Pegasus Boots. Ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that this is my favorite item in the entire game, I do not exaggerate. With this item, all 4 face buttons are now in use, and by holding A, Link will charge up a speedy dash that carries him across the screen until he collides with a solid wall, obstacle, or screen split. This improves the flow of gameplay so much compared to the first two games and makes traversing back to places you missed or climbs back up where you fell much less agonizing. While Zelda 1's map was small enough not to cause major headaches, if there had been a form of speed boost in Zelda 2, it would have been extraordinarily welcomed. With our goal now firmly in our minds, and the means to do so in speedy fashion, our next destination is the Desert Palace in the Desert of Mystery. There aren't many people in said desert, leaving the palace's origins, mystery. In fact, there's no visible entrance to the palace, only 3 statues and a plaque in an unreadable language to Link. Said language is Ancient Hylian, and unlike the previous game in which our Link was literate in all manner of text, this Link is stupid and not bilingual, so we have to go grab the Book of Medora to help us translate. Upon doing so, Link is able to enter the Desert Palace and begin his search for the second pendant. This dungeon is different from the Eastern Palace in several ways, but its most significant deviation is how open it is, to the point where there's even a segment outside, one of my favorite set pieces in Zelda dungeons. There are very few rooms the player cannot access initially, and some rooms even act as dead ends that greet you with enemies as a reward. If the Eastern Palace was a test of your movement and combat capabilities, this is a test of your memorization and routing. If you zone out or expect the dungeons to be railroaded experiences, you'll find yourself running in circles and losing more hearts than necessary. Thankfully, since this is one of the first dungeons in the game, there is a fairy fountain you can use if you sniff around for it to ensure you remain in top shape. The dungeon item is the Power Glove, which allows Link to lift boulders far bigger than him out of his way. It isn't used in the dungeon at all, but this failed NES accessory will prove invaluable to our greater exploration efforts.
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
The dungeon's boss is 3-legged molas, burrowing worms that pop out of the ground beneath Link and throw rocks at him when they attempt to burrow again. Perhaps the most curious thing about this fight is how the perceived Z-axis works. By all accounts, I shouldn't be able to hit these things when they're at peak height above Link, nor they him. But here we are, trading hits otherwise. The boss itself isn't a challenge, just pay attention to where they're popping out of and be ready to shift according to their movement, and you'll be victorious. With the Pendant of Power in our possession, the final pendant lies to the north, on top of Death Mountain. Now, don't fret too much. Since this is so early in our adventure, surely the developers wouldn't make it a massive difficulty spike that requires extreme patience to get through, right? Thankfully, they were smart and didn't repeat that mistake. Climbing up Death Mountain is split into a few segments, the first of which is a dark maze with dead ends and pits galore. In said maze, we find an old man, and he asks us to help escort him a ways further. In doing so, the man thanks Link and gives him the Magic Mirror, a very useful item for several reasons, one of which we'll get into shortly. This man also acts as a checkpoint for us, and speaking to him at any point onwards will fully restore Link's health. The next segment up the mountain involves dodging falling rocks and several cave entrances. Using these, we can find items and alternate pathways up the mountain. Near the top, though, we find a strange blue portal. Stepping on it brings us into a strange but familiar-looking place, but no longer in control of a Hylian Link. This is the Dark World, the corrupted golden land that Aghanim is attempting to breach. The golden power hidden in the land reveals one's true character by changing their form to best represent it. Despite being a near-defenseless bunny, Link can interact with a couple of Hyrulean denizens who stumbled across the world's seal, with the appearance of a grotesque deformed monster and a strangely shaped round creature. The monster explains that he and his friend were searching for the golden power on top of Death Mountain, but fell into the Dark World by mistake. Seemingly trapped in both the Dark World and on top of the mountain, the two are aimlessly wasting their time to avoid the very real possibility that their quest for power may have just ended their lives. Fortunately, the magic mirror Link was just given can save him. By using it, it teleports Link back to the Light World, and in fact can put Link in places he ordinarily would be unable to reach otherwise. Our first taste of a soon-to-become staple mechanic in the series, world shifting. Using this, we can push ever onwards to the final pendant atop the Tower of Hera. It's here where the puzzle elements of the dungeon crawling are on full display. Colored crystal switches are sprinkled throughout this vertical venture, and by hitting them they will raise and lower the corresponding colored walls that litter the dungeon. Using these, as well as the star tiles that change the floor's layout around you, is where your ability to understand the dungeon maps and puzzle solving truly comes into play. If you pay attention and understand when to flip the colored switches, as well as know when and where the appropriate times to fall down through the multi-layered dungeon is, this will be a good final challenge to prove your worth before finding the Master Sword. But if you find this prospect difficult, get ready for a wake-up call that will involve a lot of backtracking and walks of shame up and down and up and down and up and down. The dungeon's item is the Moon Pearl, another passive upgrade that doesn't directly affect us for a little while, but is told to protect us against the Dark World's more harrowing effects. At the very peak of the tower lies the most infamous boss in the game, Moldorm. This giant bug-eyed worm rapidly squirms around the arena it's on and pushes Link around with him. While avoiding damage isn't too difficult, what makes this fight so infamous is what happens if you succumb to gravity. When you fall off the stage to the floors below, the fight resets. Moldorm regains all of his HP, and you're forced to wear the bruises you received, whether to your ego or your heart, all the way back up. While I can understand the frustration this fight brought inexperienced players back in the day, considering this was not my first Zelda game, even as a younger kid I never found this fight too much to handle. Obnoxious, sure, but it's never taken me more than 2 minutes. With the final blow, the Pendant of Wisdom, and our final key to the Master Sword is ours. The Master Sword lies in the Lost Woods, a dense wood made even harder to explore by the thick fog that envelops it. As we traverse the wood, thieves, false swords, and dead ends litter the way. But finally, we find it. The Blade of Evil's Bane, the first appearance of the legendary, and now iconic, Master Sword. And what a first appearance it is. The Master Sword does double the damage of our original sword, and at full health even fires sword beams like the first 2 Zelda games. But unlike those games, where the beams were either hard to use effectively or just straight up worthless, in A Link to the Past, these things are massive, incredible tools that make mastery of the controls its own reward. I love getting to this point in the game because it's where Link starts to feel fully realized, and the rush of adrenaline when you can take enemies out from across the screen never gets old. But there's no rest for the weary, however, for as soon as the sword is pulled, Sahasrahla contacts us telepathically to congratulate us and tell us that he is sure we can now beat Aghanim. But not 2 seconds after that, Zelda calls out to us telepathically, warning Link that Sanctuary has been discovered and that she's being whisked away to the castle. The second storming of Hyrule Castle is officially a race against the clock. The assault itself is actually sort of underwhelming. It starts perfectly, with your newfound power allowing you to carve through the enemies easily until you reach Aghanim's magical barrier on the second level. The power trip feels great, but it's the second half that feels a bit underwhelming. Instead of being a mindless power trip or difficulty spike that shows where the true defenses of the castle laid in wait, the way to the top is merely room after room of a few enemies at a time. It's nothing you haven't seen before, and is a tad lame compared to the awesome opening sequence in the castle from earlier. Even with this awesome power at our fingertips, it's too late for Zelda. Aghanim taunts Link's weakness and teleports her to the Dark World, finally breaking the seal on it. Despite the loss of the princess, Link chases after the Dark Wizard, forcing a duel between the two. Much to the magician's shock, Link proves not only a match for him, but handily so. Before he finds himself unable to regale his victory, Aghanim quickly uses the new Link Between Worlds to throw Link into the Dark World, away from the Light World, and unable to stop the Dark World's power from seeping in. Despite the loss, Sahasrahla is quick to telepathically contact Link and explain that the 7 maidens were scattered across the Dark World, left in dungeons across the land to remain dormant and neutralize their power to prevent the seal from being repaired. He points Link in the right direction and wishes him luck, and with that, the true adventure finally begins. This first third of the game, where you explore and build up your mechanical skill, as well as explore this new expanded Hyrule, is such a treat and a wonderful example of Nintendo's excellent game design philosophy on full display. Every game is someone's first, and while it can be annoying to start a brand new game out of the box and be forced to endure tutorials and slower paced gameplay, A Link to the Past opening dungeons and exploration is nearly perfect in its execution. Quick, snappy, almost wordlessly communicating its ideas and intentions to the player. For newcomers, there are guide markers and hints everywhere if you choose to look. For veterans, there are workarounds and options to skip the unneeded guardrails to ensure progress. It is a sublime example of the Zelda series operating at its best and shows why A Link to the Past sticks so strongly in people's memories all these years later. You might be wondering to yourself, wait, first third? And yes, dear viewer, I did say first third. As mentioned earlier, this is where the Zelda series would begin a long tradition of having multiple overworlds to traverse in the same game. The Dark World acts as an alternate, darker take on Hyrule that's been ruined and worn down by years of evil emanating from Ganon's wrathful desires. Through your journeys in the Dark World, you'll not only complete primary objectives there, such as saving the maidens, but also complete other hidden objectives in Hyrule. For example, in the Dark World, there's a pool of shallow water that we can stand on that looks somewhat conspicuous but lacks any items or secrets. That is, until you whip out your magic mirror and teleport back to Hyrule, where you'll be standing next to a heart piece that's otherwise unreachable. This is where the highest level of exploration comes into play. Using your previous knowledge of the overworld and the new knowledge gained as you continue through the Dark World to push through previously impenetrable obstacles. It creates an amazing sense of reward for doing so, with several optional items being gated behind it. Unfortunately, the Dark World isn't completely without its flaws. Upon reaching the Pyramid of Power, it becomes readily apparent that unlike the opening of the Hyrule segment where players can choose to go to the Eastern Palace or Kakariko Village, or anywhere else for that matter, the world is segmented off for the player. The ways north and south are gated by the requirements of two items that cannot be obtained without going through dungeons, and lo and behold, the first dungeon in the Dark World features one of said items, the hammer. It's not uncommon for Zelda games to have areas of the overworld that are blocked off from item requirements. Hell, this very game does that several times, with the Zora Flippers being a great example. However, this makes the exploration far less open than the large world would initially make it seem. Zelda 1, for the most part, is entirely open to you as long as you can procure bombs and a candle, both items that are obtainable in the overworld. There are some dungeon items required to get to other dungeons, like the raft, but not having the raft doesn't lock off entire sections of the overworld. The reason that this was done was for narrative cohesion. Since this is the first game in the series to feature as much dialogue as it does, the team at Nintendo had to ensure a logical progression of dialogue and information the player was being given. It's unfortunate, then, that the story of A Link to the Past is delivered in one of the worst ways in the series' history. The story of the game so far has been fairly simple, and for the most part, delivered in a very tight manner, rarely stopping the player to repeat dialogue, instead wanting the player to get moving wherever they need to go. Unfortunately, it's here in the Dark World where the story's delivery falls horrifically flat on its face. Everything I have told you until now, from the creation myth, imprisoning war, and in-game events, are all that happens in the story from now until the end of the game. So, what's happening for the entire last 2/3 of the game? Absolutely nothing. There's no character progression, evolution, discovery, introspection, or even unraveling. Sahasrara is a fantastic example of this. At the start of the game, he's a mysterious old man whose whereabouts are unknown to most of the land. When you do find him, he's knowledgeable on the exact specifics on what you need to do and offers you assistance as a guide, and even through items like the Pegasus Boots and Ice Rod. But as soon as you pull the Master Sword, he becomes a function more than a character. He only talks to Link to give telepathic tutorial advice and never has anything to say about himself, his wife, family, Kakariko, or Hyrule outside of generic platitudes. This is the most major character Link regularly interacts with in the game, and he's more sterile than a germaphobe's house. I complimented the people of Link's adventure because despite its comparative blandness, seeing the world of Hyrule for the first time was cool. Being on the NES was an understandable limitation on what could be done with these characters, and comparing what was done in other games on the system, Zelda 2 wasn't any better or worse than most titles. But A Link to the Past fails in having any real grip with its character writing outside of the initial premise, and that's sad considering just how many incredibly written titles were on the system. This is made worse when you consider a major reason for the second half's more linear exploration was because they wanted players to experience the story in a specific way, but the unfortunate reality is that said story is delivered at the expense of the characters. 6 of the 7 maidens Link is supposed to be saving have no names, no individual backgrounds, no specific details that differentiate them from the others outside of their sprite color and the dungeon they appear in. To give you an idea of how similar they all are, I'm going to read their first line of dialogue to you right now. Try and see if you can discern any quirks or character differences in their diction, accents, or behaviors.
Link, because of you, I can escape from the clutches of the evil monsters. Thank you.
Yeah, they all start their one and only conversations with Link the exact same way. And it doesn't get much better afterwards. None of them introduce themselves, none of them discuss their past before being kidnapped, what they'll do afterwards, or even their own feelings on the situation with Aghanim. No, what we get is a couple of paragraphs of lore dumping about Hyrule, the Imprisoning War, and the Dark World. Why? I understand in-game, the existence of Ganon and the corruption of the Golden Land were more so a mystery as to the how and why things were happening. It makes sense to explain this to new players at some point, but by making these girls repositories of history and not characters, it turns what could have been cute and charming moments of a hero meeting distinct and varied women from across his homeland and seeing how they bounce off of each other, and turns it into a nothing burger of an interaction. And they have the gall to play Zelda's lullaby over these scenes, as if these moments were deserving of such an iconic theme. I want to be clear when I say this. The lack of good characters in and of itself does not make A Link to the Past a worse game. There are plenty of games I enjoy where I could easily describe the characters as worse than what's on offer here. But when A Link to the Past is often touted as one of, if not the best, video games of all time, I struggle to agree. Unlike a Mario game where the story is not the reason you're buying it, Zelda games have always sold players on the narrative they experience in-game, and characters are extremely important to a strong and emotionally gripping narrative. Zelda, at its best, can do good, hell, even great characters that enhance not only the moment-to-moment gameplay, but the narrative and thesis of the game as a whole. A Link to the Past fails in doing this, and in my opinion, hinders its narrative overall from achieving the lofty heights that I know the series can and will eventually reach. Not every moment is done so poorly, though. In perhaps the most infamous moment of the entire game, there's a young boy who you can find just south of Kakariko Village playing a flute. When you try to approach him, the animals surrounding him scatter, and he'll disappear. But if you go to the same area in the Dark World, it's revealed that the boy is longing for that same place in Hyrule, unable to go back and play his beloved flute for the animals like he used to. Link brings the flute to the boy, but his changed form prevents him from playing the flute. For one last request, he asks Link to play it for him. Link obliges, playing the same tune the boy's spirit did for the animals of Hyrule. And with that, the boy finally fades away, turning into a tree and dying. This moment is genuinely impactful for a variety of reasons, but it especially sticks out in a game where a majority of its major characters have little to none. The father in Kakariko worrying for his son, the young man coming to terms with the fact that his journey to find the Golden Power will be his end, and the somber final moments he has reflecting with Link before he passes. I love this moment, because it shines so brightly in a game that otherwise has such pedestrian writing. As a moment in this game, it's wonderful, and as a fan of the series, it acts as an awesome precursor to several incredible moments that we'll see in later titles. And yes, before any of you mention it, I know that it's clearly an ocarina, but that's what the localization called it, so it's the flute for this game only. Speaking of incredible, the dungeons of the Dark World are a significant step up from the Light World and the previous games in the series. This is the first time that we've had a distinct narrative beat to signify a difficulty increase, and while I may think the exploration of the Dark World itself isn't handled the best, the dungeons themselves remain a strong point for the game. And the first one we'll be journeying through is the Palace of Darkness. The Palace of Darkness starts with perhaps one of the coolest openings of a dungeon in the series' history. It's simple, but it starts with the same room as the Eastern Palace from the Light World. The difference being that the left and right pathways both have rooms and further areas to explore, showing the player that the dungeon crawling is going to be a lot more in-depth. Furthermore, said left and right pathways are the only ways forward at the moment, forcing the player to make a choice in which way they progress, and keep note of where each pathway takes them. The left path is much shorter, getting you a small key that you can then use to unlock the center path if you so choose. The right pathway is much longer, involving teleport pads, killing several enemies, and a giant conveyor belt that all lead to the dungeon map, small key, and a fairy fountain. After using these pathways, the central path and main part of the dungeon becomes accessible to you. There are several moving parts to this section, and one of the main ones is how the developers use the screen real estate and the player's field of view to its fullest advantage. On the right pathway from earlier, there was a walkway with a chest we couldn't reach, and in this newly unlocked central room, there's a lone chest sitting on a walkway that we can't reach. By veering to the right in this room, we can find the first chest, and by using the left pathway to bomb the conspicuous cracked floor, we can get the big key. From here, the dungeon becomes mostly linear, with some player choice if you want to go out of your way to grab some rupees for yourself. But if you take the upper left pathway, you'll come across the dungeon's item, the hammer. While not a first for the series, appearing first in The Adventure of Link, this is the first modern interpretation of the hammer. Unlike the last game where it was used to break specific obstacles and only obstacles, this time it can be used as a weapon against enemies, either directly by smashing them or hitting the ground around them to mess with them. I've never been the biggest fan of the hammer against regular mooks, instead opting to simply hit them, but I do enjoy it when it's used against boss monsters as part of a larger whole. Speaking of bosses, after obtaining the hammer, the lead up to the boss is a singular pathway that brings us face to face with the Helmasaur King. And what an incredible first impression he brings. Huge, intimidating, and armored up, the only way you can damage him is by avoiding his massive tail swipes and fire breath and smashing his armor with your new hammer. Once you break his armor, the weak spot on his forehead is exposed, and with a few shots or slashes to the face, the Helmasaur King goes down. That's 1 down and 6 to go. One thing I'd like to mention before moving on, the boss music in this game might be the worst track in the game. Not that it's horrible by any means, but allow me to play it for you in full to give you a picture of what I mean. That's it. After the initial opening notes, it goes into an admittedly adrenaline-pumping piece that uses its percussion well to emphasize the pacing of the fights in the game. But unfortunately, with how short the track is, the song loops ridiculously quickly, and over the course of a playthrough becomes extremely repetitive. I would have liked a different song for the Dark World's bosses, considering how many more there are, but I understand this game was already pretty restricted on what it could and couldn't add. Again, not a horrible song, just insanely repetitive over the course of a playthrough. With the hammer in tow, it's possible to do a lot more in the Dark World now, so for this playthrough I opted to over-prepare and collect/upgrade as much as we could before the next dungeon. This is where the Dark World's connection with the Light World is at its best, and I wish that the arbitrary item gates weren't as large as they were, because imagine getting to do all of this before the first dungeon. Walking around and seeing the village of outcasts compared to Kakariko, the desolate wastelands compared to the lush greenery of the Light World's environments. The next dungeon we're heading to actually uses the link between worlds to open the initial pathway in the dungeon. By draining the swamp in the light world, the dark world swamp is also drained, and the dungeon pathway is opened up. Welcome to the Swamp Palace. Make sure you've collected the Zora Flippers from the light world, because this is the first time that they're required for progression. Using these, you can swim across rising water levels throughout. Now, if you heard the phrase rising water and your blood started to boil, don't worry. This dungeon isn't nearly as much of a hassle to get through. The way the Swamp Palace is laid out, you'll start in a linear path that leads you to a central room that features a big chest. From here, while the room itself has several pathways, there's only one true route, with the others being impossible to reach for now, or optional, a room that gives you the compass. While the extreme linearity of the dungeon could be seen as a turnoff for some, I find it designed intuitively enough that it doesn't feel like a slog. Using your knowledge of the previous dungeon mechanics combined with the water level switching makes for a simple and satisfying dungeon. Now, that doesn't mean this dungeon is perfect. For example, this is the first key you find in the dungeon, and this is the door that you use it at. Why even put the key there? You can't get here without the flippers and raising the water in the light world, so why not just have the door open for players who got here? The dungeon's item is the hookshot, one of the most iconic items in the series' history, making its debut here. For those unfamiliar, if you know Spider-Man and how his web shooters work, imagine Link having a single web shooter. By firing the hookshot at anything heavier than Link, if it grips on, then it will pull Link along for the ride, allowing for quick traversal over gaps and other precarious areas. If the object you grip onto is lighter than Link, he plants his feet and lets said object come to him. This is a fantastic item for so many reasons, and it only gets better and better as the series goes on. For its debut title though, the hookshot more than earns its keep. The boss fight is against Argus, a giant squid with a small army of Argai that protects him from incoming damage. Fortunately, the hookshot is here to help, as it can rip away the protective wall one by one, and allow Link to pick them off individually. Once that's done, Argus will begin to bounce around the room trying to slam into Link. Simply slash away at him until he's down, and that's the end of the dungeon. Next up, the Lost Woods Dark World counterpart, the Skull Woods. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is another step up for the Dark World dungeons. If the first two dungeons were good solid Zelda dungeons, the Skull Woods is the first great one in the Dark World. It's split into two distinct halves, one of which is extremely unique. It's non-linear in a way that most dungeons aren't, where the woods house several entrances to the dungeon, some of which don't lead to anywhere at first glance. You'll need to find the correct entrance to the woods, then the correct entrance to the dungeon itself to find the big key and eventually the dungeon's item, making for extremely unique exploration compared to the dungeons in both this game and the series. Unfortunately, while I greatly enjoy this part of the dungeon for how unique it is, it can also be frustrating for first-time players. Without prior knowledge, you might end up in one of the several rooms that are flat out pointless for progression. There are a few rooms that you can find, solve, and then realize that you've looped around to a place you previously were that also wasn't the correct way. This is already frustrating, but can be made more aggravating by the wall masters that litter almost every room of this place. Our first modern incarnation of the now iconic enemy, they lurk on the ceiling of the dungeon for a time until they grab at Link. If they manage to get their grubby mitts on him, they bring him back to the entrance of the dungeon. Thankfully, the way this dungeon was laid out, it's not too aggravating, as you'll only be moving back a couple of rooms at most, but this won't be the last time you see these guys, and they can be much worse to deal with. Once you do find the key and unlock the big chest, you'll get the Fire Rod, an item that's useful in combat as well as the upcoming second half of the dungeon. Said second half is another linear march to the boss, but this is also the best one we've seen in the game to this point. Challenging puzzles, demanding mechanical skill, while not being overly punishing if you fail, and some decent instanced combat scenarios that all point towards the boss of the dungeon. Mothula. While a giant moth may not sound intimidating, think again. Upon dropping into the room, you're surrounded by blade traps at every angle. Well, that's menacing. Then the floor starts moving rapidly under your feet. Alright, that's annoying, but nothing we can't handle. Then, Mothula starts throwing beams of fire at us. Okay, I guess. This fight is an insane jump in difficulty compared to every other boss fight beforehand. And I love it so much. This fight always gets my adrenaline pumping. Dodging the traps, fire, and Mothula itself while lining up shots of the Fire Rod and the Master Sword is so damn fun. I would recommend getting the magic meter buff before this dungeon, because the Fire Rod does a lot more damage than the Master Sword, but if you don't, there's always green potions if you want to stock up on those. Regardless, Mothula is one of my favorite bosses in the game, and I always look forward to taking it down. Before the rush of the Mothula fight wears off, we can already head to the next dungeon. Located in the Village of Outcasts, it's a secret hideout where the thieves and petty ne'er-do-wells of the Dark World gather when they aren't out ne'er-do-welling. Welcome to the Thieves' Hideout. Like any good thief, this hideout does an excellent job of robbing me of any enjoyment I had from the first 3 dungeons. Okay, it's not that bad, but this is a significant step down compared to the first 3 Dark World dungeons in every way. Visually, it's a large underground hideout without any unique set dressing. Compared to the Palace of Darkness directly mirroring the Eastern Palace, the Swamp Palace featuring large amounts of water and aquatic theming, and the Skull Woods being a large forest with its own color palette for the underground sections, the Thieves' Hideout is comparatively bland. Its most unique aspects are the extremely large open rooms at the beginning of the dungeon with upper and lower floors, and the boss of the dungeon not being readily available to fight. The large open rooms are a neat idea, but lack any real challenge. The enemies don't hound you harshly, there's no direct puzzles to solve, and the only roadblock is finding the routes for the treasures, which are all in plain sight as you enter, so it's only a matter of taking every available pathway and eventually stumbling on them. After obtaining the big key, you'll need to head to the upper floors to bomb out the floor above and illuminate a conspicuously empty room below. While it may not make sense at the moment, there's a good reason for doing this. Heading down into the dungeon's basement, we can find the maiden locked behind bars, requesting Link escort her out of the dungeon. Thankfully, just like with Zelda earlier, she trails behind Link and is completely impervious to damage, so it's simply a matter of navigating her to safety. Of course, this isn't the real maiden. She didn't start with their customary greeting. Yes, if it wasn't obvious, this is a trap, and the light we shone down earlier is the key to revealing the deception. Now, for first-time players who might not be exploring every nook and cranny of the overworld, they might miss the hint an NPC in the Village of Outcasts gives that hints to the purpose of this light. And truthfully, while I appreciate they put in a hint at all, it's a bit silly to assume the maiden asking us to take her outside means turn north towards a seemingly purposeless room with no exits. It's a bit antithetical to outside. But once you do manage to walk into the room with this imposter, their true nature is revealed. Blind the thief, who hates the light. After ditching his disguise, the battle begins. Compared to Mothula, this fight is much easier. The arena isn't covered in deadly traps, Blind himself isn't firing as many projectiles, and all you have to do is slash at him with your sword enough times until he goes down. He'll fire projectiles from his head at you, and those heads will multiply as the fight goes on. The fight isn't bad, with a nice escalating difficulty, but compared to Mothula, it's a step down. Following Skull Woods with the Thieves' Hideout makes me so sad, because the Thieves' Hideout is one of the worst dungeons in the game. I think the reason it doesn't catch that much flack from people is because the build-up to it is so insanely short, with almost nothing being required to enter it once you can get to the Village of Outcasts, and the dungeon itself not being much of a challenge on top of being shorter than the previous Skull Woods. My only compliment is that by going for a different style of ending, making us bring the boss out instead of marching to it, it makes the last part of the dungeon more unique than anything we've seen to this point in the game, so I can at least give it some credit for originality. Before we make our way to the second half of dungeons for this portion of the game, there's a couple of things we can do to increase our overall strength. Oh, and one more pot shot against the Thieves' Hideout, the dungeon item you get in there, the Titan's Mitt, isn't required in said dungeon at all. Only afterwards for overworld exploration. Using the Mitt, we can find more hidden areas of the overworld, and more importantly, reunite a pair of swordsmiths together who will offer to temper the Master Sword in return. This is a massive offensive upgrade and comes highly recommended. This is also a good time to mention another first of a staple mechanic in the series, minigames. While the Zelda series never sells itself on these, a modern Zelda game without smaller side activities is hardly a Zelda game at all, I find. More often than not, they're nothing more than silly distractions to gain extra collectibles. And in this game, the only rewards you can get are money and extra heart pieces, so unless you're going for max health, none of these are required. Personally, I find these are a bit lacking in challenge outside of one. There's the 15-second game, which is exactly what it sounds like, a race you must beat in 15 seconds or less to get the reward at the end. Sounds intense, but there's an easy shortcut to shave off 5 seconds easily that anyone can use without issue. There's the digging game, which is completely luck-based and has no amount of planning or skill involved to alleviate it. And then there's the treasure chest game. This is the most common minigame you can find in the game, with 3 possible variations you can stumble across. Only one of them has a heart piece though, so if you aren't into gambling or don't have save states, I don't recommend this game either. But my god, there's one minigame that I am just plain awful at. The shooting gallery. It's as basic as you can get. 20 rupees buys you 5 arrows. Hit the targets in front of you. Hit consecutive shots, and you get a higher profit. But my god, am I absolutely awful with the arrow in this game. It's similar to the sword beam in Zelda 1, where you have to lead your shots at any enemies moving horizontally from you. This is fine enough, but there's a set of hands that block the moving targets, and they scroll at a different speed than the targets do, so it's never consistent, and I wasted so much money just trying to get footage of a complete run for this video, and I look like a damn idiot. I've never been the best at aiming in video games, and having to lead a shot is one of the most difficult things for me to do in any game. Fortunately, I was eventually able to get a few runs down where I got every shot and the maximum 104 rupee profit. Oh yeah, that's the kicker. You don't get anything really worth a damn for doing this. It's strictly for bragging rights. Or money, which is extraordinarily easy to come by in this game. Ugh. With that embarrassing display of skill out of the way, it's time to head to the next dungeon. And boy oh boy is this one infamous. The Ice Palace. By far one of the most well-known dungeons among Zelda fans for just how much of a slog it can be. 7 floors of several rooms, the dungeon's map being delivered very late into the dungeon trek, making exploration more cumbersome, and the dungeon item being an incremental upgrade instead of a usable item are all reasons not to love the dungeon. But oh boy, do you like slippery ice physics? Do you like slippery ice physics while in combat? No, that's too damn bad! I'll say it right now, the ice physics here are too damn slippery. Link's momentum carries him forever when you're trying to pivot, and while I would understand if this was a Sonic game where my movement is more of a commitment, but good lord, look at me trying to get downstairs. I'm holding down here. Why am I gliding away? Like I mentioned earlier, the dungeon's item isn't an item, but gear, the blue mail, which cuts our defense in half. I'll always appreciate a defensive boost, but I fail to see why this was placed here. The dungeon itself isn't so challenging that it's needed, and it offers no distinct advantages in the environments like other tunics in later games. I will give credit where it's due. Visually, this place looks great. The distinct icy blue sticks out in a nice way compared to every other dungeon in the game, and while I wish the actual rooms could be a bit more distinct from each other, I do admire the effort to make this place look as cold as it is. The dungeon starts off innocently enough, with a linear pathway and even a soft lock at the beginning that prevents you from fully entering without the fire rod. If you do have the rod, the first several rooms of the dungeon are all done in the same order, and for the most part do a good job of introducing the player to the upcoming mechanics they'll be facing in the dungeon. I enjoy the Pin Gator enemies especially for being so visually distinct and adorable as they rumble towards me. However, it's at this point, a room that features a giant yellow spike trap in it, that the dungeon opens up significantly. There are 2 pathways, both of which connect eventually. The problem is that the player isn't aware of that until they get the dungeon map, which is significantly farther in this time than most normal dungeon runs. You get the compass so early on comparatively, you almost forget you have it by the time you get the map. What really grates on people's nerves when going through this dungeon is just how much of a pain in the ass it is to loop around if you miss something or mess up the puzzles. There are no shortcuts you can open up, no easier ways to speed up the process. You're simply running laps until you come back towards the linear pathway to the boss. The final block puzzle is its own degree of infamous, so much so that it's recommended you do the dungeon after this one to use its dungeon item to flat out skip it. And while I didn't do that for this review, it's a testament to the frustration many experience that this is such a common recommendation. The puzzle itself is simple in its thought process. Drop a block from the upper floor down, and use it to hold this switch for the corresponding door. Problem is, when a block is pushed in this game, it can only be pushed once before it locks into the invisible grid that the game uses. And there are 4 possible blocks to push, with no easy way back up if you choose incorrectly. I think the biggest flaw of this puzzle is simply how the game cannot properly show players what it is exactly that they need to do on a first run, and unfortunately requires trial and error until they can understand the exact placement of where they need to drop the block to hold the switch down. Falling down and realizing you pushed the wrong block is not a fun time, and it's why every time I come back here, the only thing I remember is the phrase bottom left. The boss of the dungeon is Cold Stare, and well, he's even easier than Blind. The first phase is simple enough. Use your magic to melt him out of his giant ice block, and he'll split into 3 eyeballs that bounce around the arena as ice blocks fall on Link. It's not an easy fight by any means, but it is humorous to see how the difficulty of the bosses doesn't seem to be following any strict pattern. This fight and Blind are both easier than Mothula, which itself is such a jump from every other boss in difficulty, it's kind of a shock. Before the next dungeon, it's important to go over some magic items that you might not find naturally if you're not paying close attention. These are the medals, Bombos, Ether, and Quake respectively. Bombos is the only one that isn't required, and it acts as a high-cost screen nuke that incinerates anything unfortunate enough to get in the way. It's really fun, but since it's so high cost, I don't use it unless I really don't want to fight any of the upcoming enemies. The next 2 medallions, Ether and Quake, are required for entering the next 2 dungeons. They're both obtainable around the same point in the game, but you can go a pretty long time without finding them, if at all if your senses don't point you towards them. The Quake medallion is pretty obvious. There's a circle of rocks in the Lake of Ill Omens in the Dark World that, if you throw something into it, will draw out a catfish that tells Link to piss off and gives him the medallion as encouragement. The sign nearby even says this, so as long as you explore, you should naturally find this. The Ether medallion, on the other hand, might trip players up. Early on in the game, to the left of the Tower of Hera, there's a bridge that some players might just miss if they're not paying attention. If you don't cross said bridge, you won't know that there's a tablet that the Book of Medora can translate, and by doing so, will give you the Ether medallion. These medallions act pretty similarly to Bombos, but I personally only use them to open their respective dungeons. They don't hit as hard, and their animations aren't as satisfying to use on enemies anyways. But now that we have them, we can knock out the last of the Dark World's main dungeons. First up, Misery Mire. Hot damn, this place is massive. Unlike the Ice Palace, which is a large, vertically spanning dungeon that requires using that verticality to your advantage, Misery Mire is a very spread out dungeon with only a few floors. There aren't a ton of puzzles, and it could be argued that navigation is the major puzzle of the dungeon. Smart, intentional movement through the dungeon is imperative to not only getting through the dungeon, but doing so safely, because boy is this where wizards start to show up in big numbers. And unfortunately for us, they're back to their old annoying ways of teleporting everywhere around us and making life hard for melee weaponry fans. If you aren't careful, you can easily end up stumbling into several of this dungeon's dead ends and dying to their magical missiles. I think the dungeon's first lap is its strongest point, because of how large said dungeon is. Mapping it out as you move along, figuring out where the big chest and important doors are is fun, so when you find the big key, you know exactly where to go. Especially if you aren't using a guide, finding the dungeon map and figuring out where you have and haven't been as you slowly eliminate the dead ends and come closer to figuring out the correct path can be fun. Unfortunately, the puzzle to find the big key itself is not the best. When you come into this room, you'll see 2 unlit torches, which, in a Zelda game, typically means something. Lighting these doesn't do anything, but walking into the next room you'll see 2 more laid out symmetrically to the last room. Light these, and there's a rumbling sound that indicates something somewhere has changed. At its face, this seems inoffensive. Simply find the room where something changed and take advantage of it. Here's the kicker. If you did what I did and lit the torches first without knowing where the change would be made, where would you go? Through the new door that you haven't been through? Or the doors you came from to check for changes? I feel like most people would go for the former, as logically, why would they change a room you might not have even visited to check? But if you chose the latter and went into the room on the lower right, you're greeted with enemies, spikes, and a single pit. Now, why would you go into this pit? The other pits in the room beforehand didn't lead to anything particularly helpful, so why would this one? Well, you idiot, it turns out that this is the way to the big key. I feel like this puzzle could have been designed in a significantly more intuitive way. Maybe take the torches and spread them out into that third room so we can see the changes? Lock the torches away until we get a key or item that allows us to reach them? There's several ways to go about it, but this isn't the strongest puzzle in the game by a long shot. Once you get the big key, you can head back towards the dungeon item. Now, this is kind of a strange item to talk about. The Cane of Samaria can create blocks and, in specific instances, platforms that help the player progress through areas. It's a neat idea for an item, but in this dungeon specifically, it's used a grand total of once, and it's not a very difficult puzzle. It's a pretty big omission from the dungeon, considering we've played plenty of earlier dungeons where the items were not only instrumental for puzzles, but could even help out in combat. The Cane of Samaria, by contrast, isn't very effective for combat. If I need something to throw, I have bombs and random pots and debris I can use. If I need range, I can use magic or my bow to get the job done. The Cane of Samaria is a puzzle-solving item first and foremost, but it's not asked to solve enough puzzles when it's introduced, and in that sense, it kinda fails. And that's a damn shame, because I really want to like this item more. It's so unique and interesting compared to other items both in this game and afterwards. Oh well, at least it makes the Ice Palace significantly shorter. With the dungeon over, we move on to the boss fight, and... Oh. Are you kidding me? I thought difficulty curves were supposed to go up, not down, but here's Vitreous bouncing around like he forgot to submit his actual moveset to the devs and is sheepishly pretending that this was its plan all along. There is nothing about this fight that's difficult. The first phase is so easy, you don't need to move if you don't care about taking damage, and the second phase is equally easy, except now instead of multiple smaller targets bouncing towards you, it's one big target. Woo! Yeah, let's get this over with. This boss is lame, and the fact you aren't even required to use the dungeon item to help beat it makes an already lame boss even lamer. Only one more maiden to go, and boy does this dungeon have some requirements to get in. You're going to need the Quake spell just to enter, the Cane of Samaria for a significant amount of traversal, and the Fire and Ice rods for puzzles and combat. Don't even try this dungeon without these 4 items, you won't have a good time if you do. Also, since this dungeon is deep in the Dark World's Death Mountain, and there isn't much game left after this point, I recommend doing any cleanup and exploration you saved right now. Some of this exploration is of vital importance anyways, as just like the first game, you'll need the silver arrows to beat Ganon when you confront him. You can also fully upgrade the Master Sword into the Golden Sword, and get the final Overworld Heart Piece if you're going for every single one. When you're ready, it's time to enter our final dungeon. Welcome to Turtle Rock. This place is awesome. Several new mechanics, a really neat dungeon item, great exploration. This place is a really great final test before the endgame. Starting out, the Cane of Samaria is used to create a single platform that takes you across a large gap. This is our introduction to one of the central mechanics of the dungeon, and a general design philosophy of Turtle Rock as a whole, using single rooms to feature increasingly winding pathways that lead to alternate routes. The first example is a simple 4x4 grid, with plenty of exit points. But in the immediate next room, there's a puzzle featuring unlit torches that requires careful aim of the fire rod and good route planning to light the torches and exit the room without the lights going out. One of the coolest things this dungeon does is use the cliffs of Death Mountain outside to its advantage. This allows the map to reset inside, so if you need to refill your magic you can, as well as get the 24th and final heart piece by traveling to the light world. It also makes the exploration extremely unique compared to other Dark World dungeons, since heading outside halfway through is the only way to get the Mirror Shield, our final dungeon item. The shield is pretty damn large on Link, and it allows him to block the largest amount of projectiles in the game, including these giant lasers. While it isn't used in any major puzzles, the fact it's useful in more than one instance is already a plus compared to the Cane of Samaria the dungeon before. The last trek to the boss is where the dungeon hits its zenith of Challenge 2, with a large web of pathways in a dark room that you have to navigate while avoiding obstacles and finding the switch to open the exit. The incremental challenge of the dungeon is very well done, and considering it leads to the coolest boss fight in the game, it makes Turtle Rock one of my favorite dungeons in the game before even stepping foot in the boss arena. Once we do reach the arena, we find ourselves face to face with Trinix, a tri-headed beast that uses one of two elements to attack Link at a time, with a third head that will defend its elemental brothers. This fight is impossible to win if you don't have a steady supply of magic, so be sure to have good aim or at least some potions on standby in case you run out. I would recommend coming in equipped with the Fire Rod first, because the ice attack from Trinix can be infinitely more annoying to deal with over time. It freezes the floor wherever it hits, making dodging future attacks from any of the heads more difficult. The Firehead will simply throw streams of fire at you until you kill it, and once the elemental heads are down, the final head will start running around the room to try and attack you. Simply dodge its movement and hit its central segment to finish the fight, and finally save Princess Zelda herself. She makes clear that the time to take Ganon on is now. With all 7 maidens saved, they use their combined power to help unlock the entrance to Ganon's ultimate lair of evil, Ganon's Tower. Talk about a triumphant, climactic dungeon. 8 floors of difficult, engaging, vast floors that draw on all of your skills and abilities learned across your adventure to push you to your limit as a hero. Almost every item you've collected to this point will be used in some form or fashion, some in ways you wouldn't even expect. The Cane of Samaria, for example, has a third use I'm sure many new players wouldn't expect. If you place a block and then try using the cane again, it fires a projectile that goes through multiple targets. Use this to flip multiple crystal switches at once, and boom. Such a cool solution. This dungeon also houses several remixed boss fights. The Armos Knights are fought first, and while the fight isn't too difficult, the arena is now made entirely of ice tiles, making melee combat and dodging a bit more difficult. If you fully upgraded yourself, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. After this fight, you gain access to the big key, and eventually the dungeon item, the Red Mail. It further bolsters your defense, and while right now this might not seem all that great, trust me, you're going to appreciate it very soon. Once you have the Red Mail, the dungeon becomes extraordinarily linear. Not that I find it a problem in this instance, since this linearity is used to create a focused, intense experience that demands the player stay alert at all times. Puzzles are snappy but not brain dead, combat is difficult but your upgrades make you feel plenty capable, and above all, the pace of the march towards Ganon is excellent. Linearity in any game is never an issue, but in a Zelda game, if you're going to be linear, make sure that experience is damn solid. And Ganon's Tower is some of the best this game has to offer. It's simultaneously a fantastic power trip, showing just how far you've come on your adventure from the very beginning, and a very difficult gauntlet that won't let up until you've managed to beat it. At the top of the tower, Aghanim teases Link about how happy he is to see him again, but that there won't be a third meeting between them. He'll immediately begin throwing magic at Link just like their first encounter, but this time there's 2 extra shadows of him that assist. Despite the numbers advantage, this fight proves to be hilariously lopsided in Link's favor, to the point where I took one hit the entire fight because I forgot I had the hookshot equipped at the start of it. Aghanim never once changes his strategy or adapts to anything, so the fight is almost mindlessly easy. As a final encounter, it's extremely lame. Thankfully, this isn't the final boss. When Aghanim falls, Ganon's spirit rises from the wizard and retreats to the Pyramid of Power. Link gives chase, and when he confronts Ganon, he expresses shock at his alter ego's defeat at the hands of a mere boy. This doesn't deter him, however, and he exclaims that his wish on the Triforce to conquer the Light and Dark Worlds will be made after he destroys us. Final boss time. And what a final boss it is! 4 phases of hard-hitting, epic combat that's as no-nonsense as possible. Take the cool climactic narrative of Link's adventure and expand the Ganon fight from the first game, and that's what this encounter becomes. Backed by an epic theme, this is the first final boss in the series to be truly realized as a satisfying climax to the adventure. The first phase has Ganon use his trident as a projectile, teleporting around the stage and catching it before throwing it and disappearing again. When you've hit him enough times, he'll start summoning blazing bats to surround himself and then attack you. These things are small, but extremely dangerous, so be sure not to let them hit you. Once you've hit him enough times, he speeds up his pace, and when you manage to hit him, he'll hop up and slam the ground, knocking the outer edges of the platform away and turning the arena into an island. Once that's done, the final phase begins. Ganon turns off the lights, smothering the torch flames on the south end of the room. This will hide him in the shadows and make him impossible to hit otherwise. You need to use the fire rod or lantern to light them, reveal Ganon, and quickly slash at him. Once you do this, Ganon will be stunned and open to an attack with the silver arrows. Unlike the first game though, one strike doesn't end him. You'll need to hit with 4 arrows successfully for Ganon to fall, but once you do, Ganon will explode and disappear, revealing a hidden staircase. These stairs lead to the essence of the Triforce itself. It explains to Link how its wish-granting powers work, and that the stronger a wish made on it, the stronger the Triforce's expression of said wish will be. With Ganon's defeat, the Dark World will slowly revert into the Golden Land, but the Triforce's power can still be used. Link steps forward, places his hand on the Triforce, and the credits begin. But instead of a cliffhanger, we see a roll call of all the denizens of Hyrule and their whereabouts. The King of Hyrule has been revived, as well as the sage loyal to Zelda who protected her for so long. Sahasrahla has returned to Kakariko. The people Link met in the Dark World whose fates were doomed have been saved, and even your uncle is back home safe and sound. Link's wish is never explicitly stated, but it's made clear that through his wish, everyone in Hyrule was given a happy ending. All that remains is to put the Master Sword back in its place, as there's no longer a need for it. Here, in the Lost Woods, it can rest until the next time a hero needs to call on its power. What a step up from the first 2 games. Everything that the NES duology did, A Link to the Past did better. Sometimes only marginally, like with the game's story not quite being as well delivered as other narrative-based games on the system, but a majority of the time being such a leap forward in design and execution it's almost shocking it's the same series. An overworld that rewards curiosity but isn't too cryptic. Dungeons that for the most part are snappy and satisfying to complete. Items that expand Link's arsenal in unique and interesting ways. A soundtrack that properly exudes the scale of the adventure across 2 worlds. Graphics that are leaps and bounds ahead of anything the previous 2 titles could conceptualize. And most importantly, being so well designed that to this day, 35 years after its initial release, the game still acts as a rock-solid foundation not only for the Zelda series, but gaming as a whole. A Link to the Past is not my favorite Zelda game. In fact, there's several games in both the main series and spin-offs that I would put above this one for any variety of reasons, but that isn't because of this game having massive flaws or shortcomings. This game has simply been done better over time, both by 2D and 3D games in the series. In that same vein though, that doesn't mean I don't recommend this game. Hell no, it is a fantastic game, easily beatable in a weekend by any Zelda veteran, and if you want to make this your first Zelda, this is one of the best options. The opening of the game is still one of, if not the best designed openings in the series history, and will teach you everything you need to know about the game as you play without bogging you down with tutorials or overbearing guidance. By far, the most impressive thing about this game is that you can still pull lessons and inspiration from it so many years later. A timeless classic that is truly a link to gaming's past. What more can really be said? This game has been an absolute pleasure to play over and over again throughout the years, and this most recent playthrough really solidified in my eyes the sheer power that this game's legacy has had, not only on Zelda, but on the greater gaming sphere as a whole. This level of quality is what I was talking about at the beginning of this retrospective, and it's a level of quality that many franchises dream of. But for Zelda, this game set an expectation. This game is the baseline for all future titles. How will Nintendo exceed this level of quality in future games? Only time will tell. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Seth. I appreciate each and every single one of you, and take care.